I am a lawyer, but I am not necessarily your lawyer. The materials discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be deemed legal advice. If you have a specific legal question according to your circumstances, then I encourage you to speak with an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. Welcome back to another edition of Ag Law. Today, we've got a very special guest from the South, Florida style. We've got Mike Martin in the house. And Mike, it's been a few years, but we first met a while back when we worked on a webinar for the American Bar Association, General Practice, Solo and Small Firm Divisions, Agriculture Law Committee. What a mouthful on, yes, I believe, crop insurance. Isn't that right?
Yes, we did. Absolutely.
That was a fun webinar. I think that recording is still available with the American Bar Association. So, Mike, why don't you tell our listeners about you and your agricultural law practice?
Okay, well, here in Lakeland, I come from a family of lawyers. My dad was a lawyer, and he actually wrote the Florida Citrus Code back in the late 30s, and he had 6 children, and 5 of us have law degrees. So I grew up owning citrus trees and building barbed wire fences in the Green Swamp north of Lakeland, and my parents raised Arabian horses for 30 years. So I became an expert at shoveling stalls, and I really didn't like that. So I decided to do something else. I left Lakeland High, went to a little college in Tennessee called Sewanee, where I ended up with a degree in English literature. But then I went to the University of Florida, where I got my degree in law and got out and started practicing agriculture law in the early 70s. We started representing citrus processors. I was trial counsel for Minute Maid for 15 years, for Florida Natural, for all of the citrus processors. And then in the 90s, the evolution of the fungus incidentally, where farmers across the world had their crops destroyed by contaminated pesticides, and I had more trials with DuPont than any other lawyer in America. But it's been evolutionary. I now do ag law all the time. I represent a lot of nice farmers. I've worked with lawyers in 16 states, and it's very diversified. So tell me what part of the seed you'd like me to break down, or the orange or the mango, you name it.
So, I'm a good old Midwestern girl. I grew up in Illinois, corn and bean country. My family, also had some wheat and beef cattle, swine, and I think a lot of people forget that states like Florida, California are really big agricultural states, but they just have different types of agriculture commodities. I know that you mentioned citrus, but can you speak a little bit more about the larger agriculture commodities in Florida?
Sure, absolutely. That's when I grew up there in Central Florida. What surprised most people, Polk County is central. It's a very large county. We were the second largest producer of cattle in the United States, grass-fed beef. And we had Angus cows north of town, and I had a bull run me over one day. But as to agricultural commodities, if you start at Disney World and go straight down the middle of Florida, through Miami, down to Key West, there are thousands and thousands of acres of various types of produce. And just by cases, if you're in Gainesville, you have cabbage growers of hundreds of acres of cabbage. And they grow products called chufas, and they actually grow tobacco. You go a little farther north in Florida, you have hundreds of acres of peanuts. And you come to Central Florida, Lakeland, we were always called the citrus capital of the world. There are multiple varieties of citrus, and we had 120,000 acres of citrus, about a third of which has gone to evolution of people moving in and diseases. But as you go south, you'll find hundreds and hundreds of acres of watermelons. and you'll find hundreds of acres of tomatoes. And I'm just thinking, and you can pull off the road and find one of my farmer clients. And the last time I was in Hardee County, which is south of us, he gave me a big bag of fresh squash. And then I have another farmer who's growing onions, big white onions. So we grow anything and everything. But as you go further south, I represent a wonderful farm family in the south, a mango farmer family. They've been there for 100 years. Some of the mango trees are 90 feet tall, and they're 100 years old. So you have they have stuff called sapodillos and lychee nuts. You go further south, you find limes and lemons. I don't mean to inundate you with this, but this is the real Florida. When you leave and go south on these back roads, and you see farmers and you see people riding horseback. I left Okeechobee, Florida the other day and got stopped, and there was 5 cars in the road. It was because there was a 200-person trail ride celebrating the Kissimmee Cracker Trail going from Orlando, Florida down to Okeechobee, blocked traffic for 2 hours. So I'm on the FFA Foundation, and FFA is about communication. And so I work with lots of young people. I teach ag law at Warner College and creative writing at a school called Southeastern. So,
That's
anyway.
right. You're an author. Do you want to say a little bit about your book that you wrote?
Yeah, in the late anyway, I was an English literature and poetry major at a college called Sewanee, which was very, very liberal arts oriented, and to a guy who's done so much science. Well, yeah, in the late 1990s, I had moms email me that their children had been born blind in relationship to pesticide exposure. The cases were involved in Wilmington, thrown out on the emotion. So I spent several years writing a really good piece of literature about children being born blind in relationship to pesticides, while at the same time creating a subplot in World War II Germany to make the book more exciting. It's actually done very well, and it's a favorite book of women creative writing professors. It's called The Crestfallen Rose.
And it's available on Amazon, isn't that right?
Right. You just type in The Crestfallen Rose on any search engine, and it's a really good piece of literature.
So, Mike, I'm curious. I know that we've already talked a little bit about crop insurance, but besides crop insurance, what are the other legal issues that are coming across your desk from farmers there in Florida?
Well, you have a lot of issues involving, estate planning, or, are they going to be able to save their farms? You have a lot of issues relating. We have something called the Greenbelt law down here. I represent the property appraiser for 30 years. And farmers in Florida get what's called an agricultural classification. Because you can imagine if you have 500 acres across from Disney World, it's worth $300,000. By receiving an agricultural classification, you can be taxed at $10,000. But what we're really getting the issues is with people. We have 21 million people in Florida, and we have all these economic things that's facing them. And the big issues are keeping their families together, keeping them educated, and trying to keep them interested in farming.
So in terms of crop insurance, what are the types of things that you do for farmers that are perhaps having a crop insurance dispute?
Well, crop insurance, let me just give an example of you're dealing with the government. Okay. We had Hurricane Irma through here a year ago fall, which was put 13 inches of rain on citrus groves and down near Fort Myers, down near Florida Gulf Coast University. And we found when the crop insurance adjusters went out, they used a handbook where they only looked at above ground symptoms. Is the tree dead? Are the leaves brown? Of course, the trees looked okay, but they'd been underwater for 3 weeks. So they were effectively dead. So they denied the fact that the trees had been destroyed. And Bill Crispin and I went together to bat with a couple of crop insurance companies where we were able to get them to not go by the handbook, which only thinks about freezing, and understand that trees that are underwater for 3 weeks are going to die. And we have crop insurance cases now dealing with cabbages and water, anything that's insured. But we also have National Appeals Division hearings where FSA has denied grant credits or farm credits for hurricanes. So there's a lot of different stuff going on. There's lots to do. And my sales pitch to young people is that, as you can see, that I'm over 25, and we need lawyers desperately. We need good lawyers in agriculture.
So, in terms of the farm estate and succession planning, what would be your biggest advice to farmers there in Florida or from around the United States?
Well, they have a spouse that will live to be 400. But the biggest thing is there's and you may know better, there's a lot of farm service acts. There's a lot of things people can do with agriculture. As you know, when I graduated from law school, I wanted to be an estate tax lawyer, but in Lakeland, Florida, there weren't many estate tax issues. So I became an agricultural lawyer. But I call it the deduction, is up to $5 million. And for instance, we live in Lakeland, which is the home of Publix supermarkets, which is America's leading grocery firm. And my brother, who is a lawyer, represents the principals of Publix, for example. And they have all sorts of trust and whatever they've set up to try to minimize the estate tax. But you just have to sprinkle it amongst your children and just have gifting programs and do the best you can and hope. We've had some farmers, as you know, nearly go bankrupt because of the estate taxes. In other words, the problem is very hard and the problem is not easy.
Right. I know, Mike, that you do quite a bit of litigation, a lot more litigation than I do in terms of agriculture. So can you talk a little bit more about the different kinds of litigation that you are specifically involved with?
Yeah, look back. I spent the first 6 years of my practice as a district attorney, and you got the volume out of jury trials. I tried about 100 trials, and they're here in Central Florida where they were all violent crimes. So
Mike, I've always wanted to be on a jury, and I'm a little afraid about saying this publicly, but right. I've always wanted to be on a jury because I'm so curious. And every time I get the notice, it's never at a good time. And then I eventually left New York, and so I haven't been noticed up to be on a jury duty here in Illinois yet. But have you ever been on a jury, Mike?
One time. They usually knock me off.
Yeah. I remember in law school, my torts professor was on a jury for a torts case, and so he was just shocked that they even let him on the jury. But what was sort of your big take-home lessons from your time as a jury trial lawyer?
Well, I still do. I had a trial against Bayer Corporation last July on seeds. And they brought in their 10 lawyers, as you know, and I actively try cases. I have a couple of younger lawyers. We all go together. And most lawyers, as you know, tried 25 cases, but I probably have the scars to prove it. I've tried over 300 jury trials.
That's a lot.
Still doing it. They're actually picking up. I had one involving bees. What's the value of bees? Where pesticides were accused of harming bees recently. I have one of these mango farmers down south where herbicides drifted over from the adjoining landowners, and mangoes don't like 2,4-D and dicamba. And but the big thing is the humor of it. For example, I was prosecuting a fellow for driving while under the influence of alcohol, and the jury came back and found him not guilty. And about 2 weeks later, the defense counsel was saying, "You know why they let that guy off, Mike?" And I said, "No, he fell out of his car." He was arrested on Interstate 4 by a deputy sheriff, and one of the jurors was able to convince the other juror that deputies don't have the right to arrest on the interstate. So they went outside the evidence. I've had other cases where the jurors all watch and see what kind of cars people drive to the courthouse, and they'll talk about, well, he's driving a Toyota and he's got a real fancy car, so I don't know if we like him or not. Another one will say, did you notice the Rolex watch that the lawyer had? But it's the trick, not the trick. The thing with juries is it's just openness and candor. When I get in front of a jury, I say that my job is to be a teacher. And if I teach them well enough, then I'm going to be able to explain why we should be, we should get what we're entitled to. So the issue is, you don't run around the room and dance or whatever. The issue is clarity and making people understand a difficult subject simple. And of course, the defense wants to make a simple subject complex. And I want to make a complex subject simple. And
Yeah.
that's what you learn how to do. But I will say this, Carrie, when you come home after talking like you're in the first grade, if you're sitting around the dinner table, your family really doesn't appreciate the lawyer talk. So we have to go back and talk in a better manner.
Right, that's true. I know, Mike, that most of our listeners are farmers and ranchers from coast to coast, but I know we do also have a few other lawyers and even some law students that are listening. Last summer, I went to a trial advocacy training in Boulder, Colorado. One of the instructors said to me, or to the class, that he who knows the rules of evidence the best owns the courtroom. And I guess I'm curious if you agree with that statement. And then secondly, what advice you would have for any agriculture attorneys or law students that are listening that perhaps want to get more experience with the rules of evidence and how to use them in the courtroom?
Well, by coincidence, I just got the Lexis pamphlet yesterday of a 2020 version of the Federal Rules of Evidence. Mm-hmm. And I also carry a sheer coincidence. My daughter, Rachel Martin, is in her second year of law school at Stetson Law, and she's studying evidence. So I wrote her and told her that, here's this new evidence book, and she's been through 2 jury trials with me. So evidence was my favorite course in law school. And my dad was a very fine lawyer. But anyway, if you understand the rules of evidence, then you're able to do. My job is at the end of the trial, if all of my evidence goes in, then I know I've done what I'm supposed to do. Mm-hmm. But we live and breathe the evidence rules. And they're also fun to read. I actually have the pamphlet, and I'll pick up a hearsay rule, and I'll pick up Earhart's Florida book on evidence and read it. If you have to stay up to date, because I'm sure and this is a digression, in law, what you did yesterday doesn't really matter. Like I have a meeting with a major company next week, and I say, look, the fact I may have been successful last week, I know doesn't matter. It's what I'm doing with this seed farmer because his seed was contaminated with anthracnose. We think you ought to pay him. But you have to have the biggest thing is, I think, is to have a sense of humor and don't take yourself too seriously.
That's good advice.
You have to learn it, you have to print it, you have to believe it, and enjoy it. Enjoy talking to people.
So this probably is not the case for all of your clients, but I think that generally speaking, farmers and ranchers are a little adverse to working with lawyers, and perhaps when they're working with you, maybe it's their first or maybe their second time ever working with an attorney. And so what advice do you have to our listeners who perhaps are thinking about hiring an agriculture litigation attorney or perhaps an agriculture attorney of a different practice area for the first time?
Well, first of all, you need to be a phone call from a watermelon farmer in Hardy County. I go down there. My mango farmers are 3.5 hours away. I show up and I'm hands-on, and I go through the plants and the trees with them. We talk about what their problems are. And they finally realized that my only agenda is that I'm like a sponge. I got to have knowledge. My goal is to represent them. And one of the things I'm happiest about after doing this for several decades is my farmers know when they call us that we're going to get an honest answer. May not be one they like, but they have implicit trust in us to help them every step of the way. And what I've told the 2 younger lawyers working with me when we finished the week with Bayer Corporation, and they're very outgoing, very confident. And I put my arm around them and I said, the reason I hired you, Scott and Javen, is because you have integrity. I said, I can teach you to talk, or you can learn how to talk and walk and put in the evidence, but I can't teach integrity. And some listeners may think that's corny, but that's what I'm after. If I can find lawyers to work with who have integrity, then the farmers understand that. Across Florida, I had a major 30 or 40 years ago, a farmer down south for whom the stadium is named at the University of Florida told another lawyer that he said, well, Mike has a reputation for telling his clients the truth, whether they want to hear it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I was happy to do that. We get along with people, but they end up knowing that we actually give a darn, and that's what you have to do.
Yeah. One of my favorite books is called E-Myth, Entrepreneur Myth. And then there's another one, E-Myth Revisited and E-Myth Attorney. And then one of the biggest advice that that he gave, and I think that the author is Michael Gerber, but don't quote me on that, was to, when you hire people in your business, no matter what kind of business it is, right? If it's a law firm or an agribusiness, is to hire people with integrity and character, because you cannot teach that. And so I totally agree with you on that. And so I guess is your advice then for our listeners when they are looking for an agriculture attorney to be on the lookout then for attorneys that have integrity and character?
Well, also call around and ask, who's the lawyer that will show up and walk through the dirt with them, and who's the guy who you can call on Saturday who's willing to talk to you, and who's the guy who will come to the farm 4 or 5 times. To work these questions, you have to understand their issue and their plants or their animals to the nth degree. And agriculture, while large, is small. I've had cases of farmers called me from Toledo, Ohio, tomato farmers, saying, "Hey, we heard about you." I've had farmers in Phoenix. I spent a couple of years in Fargo on bacterial ring rot on potatoes or something. But the word gets out and people start looking for competent people. But what they've got to do is just talk. And if their own lawyer doesn't understand agriculture, ask them to find somebody who does. I work with some really good lawyers across America. I mean, in Georgia, I was with a fellow named Jay in Valdosta. We were in Adel, and Craig Johnson in Fargo. I can name these people that I've been proud to work with across America.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. I mean, even whenever I was in New York City, primarily, I lived in New York for over a decade of my life. And a lot of people would ask me, like, how in the world were you an agriculture lawyer in the most densely populated city in the country? And I'm like, well, my farmer clients, with very limited exceptions, because there are some rooftop farms in Brooklyn and things, but for the most part, they didn't live there, right? They lived elsewhere all over the country. And, I really loved working with perhaps even their local small town attorney when they wanted to bring in somebody with agriculture experience. So I think that you bring up a really great point, Mike, that, there you are, I believe is Lakeland, Florida, right?
Yes.
And you're working with farmers, all over the country, because you've developed, I'm not going to use the word specialization or concentration, but you've definitely developed a particular skill set with in certain areas. And, I think a lot of people think that they're going to hire an agriculture lawyer, that they need to go to their own backyard. And there's nothing wrong about working with an attorney in your own backyard, but perhaps that lawyer and you should be working with another agriculture attorney that has that very specialized skill set. I know your skills are different than my skills in different areas. So I think that you bring up a really great point. So Mike, what are some other things that you've been working with farmers there in Florida specifically?
Well, I just try to think we go through last year. Well, it was, we had one day we hear a lot about organics, for example, and a situation where organic cattle feed was sold to a rancher down in RD County. And apparently for whatever reason, they overate and they foundered. And so you had 25 bulls die. I also have been litigating for 2 or 3 years representing a farmer accused of using pesticides in and that his pesticides, Mustang in Montana, killed bees. And but we've been debating that for forever. The case I have next week is anthracnose coming in on seeds, and with Bayer Corporation, it was the wrong variety. With another seed company, it was I'm trying to think, it was vines coming in on seeds. They're grown in China, and there's no real monitoring of it. It comes over here and gets shipped out to the farmer. And zucchinis don't like viruses, by the way. That's another crop. So
it sounds it sounds like you're probably working with a lot of experts in that kind of litigation. Is that right?
I should mention that, yes. Through all these years, psychiatry is not really a proper word. I seek out the most competent people I can find. I found years ago when I was up in Toledo on bacteria on some type of tomatoes that my opponent then, which was Upjohn, they went and hired every expert within 100 miles before I got there. So now, since I'm normally first on the scene, I usually try to find the most competent person for that problem. If it's a herbicide problem, find a herbicide problem. If it's entomology, find someone who knows about bugs and pests. If it's a fungus, find a horticulturist. But we know who the good people are, because you've got to have an accurate answer.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, if it's a virus, you have to identify it properly. Or if your farmer just did something wrong, they didn't water, or they cut corners on fertilizer, or it was too hot. You got to get an accurate answer. But I have a whole group of experts from who've been helping me. Earlier, one of my experts is a Purdue graduate in Bachelor's of Economics, Master's, and PhD, and was head of the Department of Economics at the University of Florida. So I'm in IFAS. I'm up there all the time talking with scientists. And I attend meetings on things like greening and citrus. 2 reasons. One, I want to know, and 2, I want to meet the farmers.
Mm-hmm. So what are the biggest pieces of advice do you have for your farmer clients when they're in the middle of litigation? I think from my standpoint, and I do mostly family law litigation. I do some commercial litigation, but my clients have no idea how long the process is going to be. I think that they get very frustrated with that. And I'm curious, what conversations do you have with your farmer clients who are involved in litigation about the process and the timeline?
Well, normally those processes have a lot of conversations that are not repeatable, but they are entitled to be chagrined and flabbergasted and upset with the timeline. But ultimately, they just hunker down because, one, we communicate regularly. I have another case out north of town dealing with flooding. That's another subject. We have mitigation banks in Florida where you can build your mall somewhere, and then they do a mitigation bank. That's another subject we should talk about, where the mitigation banks block the natural flow of water from adjoining landowners. So we're here month after month, year after year in court, and it's just a slow process. And you just have to sit down with them and let them know that you're not going to abandon them. And so you don't want them to abandon you. And we're going to be partners for 2 or 3 years. So that's what you have to tell them. But they are justifiably upset. So am I. But in crop insurance arbitration, you don't have any depositions. You just show up and try the case. It's wonderful. But you get in the federal court against a major corporation who brings 10 lawyers who are going to run up hundreds of hours on their client. Yeah. You just have to be persistent and stubborn, I guess. But communication is the key.
Yeah, and I know that I could certainly improve in this area, but I will tell you that is the one thing that I feel like clients appreciate the most, or they miss the most, if they don't have enough communication. But the court system is anything but fast. And I know I don't do your type of litigation specifically, but just to encourage them to settle in the process. So Mike, what I'd like to do is direct folks to your website, because I know it's chock full with a myriad of great information. It's martinpa.com. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, www.martinpa.com, MARTINPA.com. And I started it, by the way, in 1995. And since you've looked at it, it's common sense questions and answers. It's not geared for farmers to read. Although I do confess that some of my defense lawyers read it and then ask the farmer if he'd listen to me first. But it's a lot of common sense information.
Right. Yeah. No, you've got a blog here, some various resources, even some case information there. So I definitely encourage our listeners to go and check that out. So Mike,
Yeah, we're just writing some new blogs too that we're doing.
Great. Well, I know we're just giving a general overview of your practice. I know we're going to have you back on the podcast and dive a little deeper with some of these various topics, such as seed law, for example. So Mike, in close, do you have any advice for our listeners who are perhaps looking for an agriculture lawyer? I know that you were talking about integrity, but if somebody doesn't even know where to even start, right? They have an agricultural issue. They need legal advice. What is your suggestion to those people listening?
Well, I think, first of all, they should talk to their fellow farmers, but most people know a lawyer in town and go to him or her and be very candid and say, I have an issue where I think that my corn crop has died from exposure to dicamba or something. And can you help me find someone competent in this area? Because of digression, if the cases I've worked in other states, the lawyers and farmers have become very good friends, and they know we're there just to simply do a good job. But to reach out across America, for instance, in Florida on fine law, if you type in the word ag law in any city in Florida, you find me. But really, you've just got to tell get someone to help you. I find, by the way, many farms are now run by the daughters who are very well educated and do a wonderful job. And they find me. They get on the internet and they do a lot of research, and the phone rings and we talk. And we don't, we reach out. I mean, we get lots of calls and we talk to people and we give advice. We're happy to do that. We don't send bills to people. We have a lot of knowledge after all these decades of taking on all these companies that we're happy to share with any farmer, any lawyer. If we help them someday, fine. If not, we're happy to tell them who to go see and what to do.
Well, great. Thank you so much for your time. Again, the website is www.martinpa.com. Your contact information, I'm sure, is on that website, Mike, but go ahead and tell our listeners perhaps the phone number and email to contact you, if you don't mind.
Sure. The email is just as easy. It's just Mike, M-I-K, Mike at martinpa.com. And the phone in Lakeland, Florida is 863-686-6700. I had to think a second about my phone number, but we're here in Lakeland. Mike Martin is a very common name, but there's only one Michael Martin lawyer in Lakeland, Florida, or in agriculture. Just keep punching the internet and we'll pop up somewhere. Or if you don't, like I say, talk to people and say, help me find someone competent. What we do, if I'm not able to do it, I'll say, well, go talk to somebody in this area, go somewhere else. We're happy to talk to people.
All right, great. Well, thank you again for your time, Mike, and I'm looking forward to a future conversation on some other specific agricultural law issues.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me.